It's rather late in the evening, and I don't know about you, but I need my drink. So I'm not going to keep you very long because, you know, I'm not what you call a laborer who's working on a wage which is being paid by the hour. Rather, I leave you with a few thoughts which I hope you will remember and think about. And these thoughts are not, in the sense of thoughts which are dramatic, but I hope they will provoke some ideas. So I'd like to talk to you my experience of what I learned from writing my last book, which was called Brand Breakout. Maybe the cover of the book is somewhere, but if not, it doesn't matter. The point is, you know, my friend C.K. Prahlad, when I used to do often, you know, joint speeches with him at companies or in conferences. And he told me, you know, Nirmalaya, never focus on best practice, but focus on next practice. And what I want to say is, you know, I really took that to heart, and it was transformational for me. And the reason it was transformational for me was most of the people go as academics, we study what companies are doing, especially in the management guru space, and then we write about the best practices of those companies, you know. That's what companies are doing today. And of course, if you pick the best companies, 99.99% of the other companies are not doing it, so they would benefit from doing that, right? So that's the whole business model of management gurus, right? We learn from one, we teach the other, we charge both, okay? So, but you know, he got me thinking about this next practice thing. And so this book, which I wrote, Brand Breakout, which has just come out last month, it started with my friend J.B. Steenkamp, who I've known for about 20, 25 years. He was sitting in my apartment, and we were doing what we always like to do in the evening, which is have a drink. And we were drinking our favorite bottle of French wine, and JB is Dutch, I'm Indian. And for those of you who don't know the Dutch, they have a high proclivity towards arguing about anything, right? So when JB and I sit together, we'll start around 7 o'clock with our bottle of wine, and probably till 11:30 midnight is going to be an argument, right? And if you saw us once, you would say they'll never talk to each other again. But 20 years later, we are still, you know, best friends, and we've written several books and several articles. God knows how many articles we've written. So we start off by saying the latest list of the 100 global brands has come out. You know, some inter-brand releases. What are the top 100 global brands in the world? I look at the list. I throw it to JB. I said, there's not a single brand from emerging markets. JB, being a proper Dutchman, says, yeah, that's because they don't know anything about branding. How do you expect them to have any brands? We start an argument. And after the end of the argument is, and this is where it comes to next brand. If we look at best practice, we would say there are no emerging market brands. They don't know how to develop brands. That would be best practice, and you can stop at that point. But we don't stop there. We then start saying, okay, suppose for a moment emerging market brands had to go global and become global brands, and not global brands by which I mean emerging market brands selling in other emerging markets, but emerging market brands selling in Western developed markets of USA and Europe and Japan. So we start thinking, and we start speculating, and we start making hypotheses. And basically, the whole book was born there. And in our book, what we have done is we have laid out 8 different pathways that emerging market brands can take to become global. We have examples of each. We also have the limitations of each pathway, because we are true academics. As an academic, you don't want to write a book, which many of people write, which says all companies should do X. You know, I cannot write that kind of book, because that just would not be me. So I have to write a book that says, under these conditions, this is the right pathway. Under these conditions, this is the right pathway. So that's what we have written, and we have these 8 pathways in the book. But what I like to do is not talk about the book, because the book you can kind of read, you know, but I like you to take you through some thought experiments that we did. And we said, like, if you were 50 years ago thinking about having brands from Japan go global, you would have started laughing. If 25 years ago, you would have thought about brands from South Korea going global, you would have started laughing. I mean, they really had terrible products, you know. And they were, at that stage, nobody could imagine that Japanese and Korean brands would become as great as they are today. So then we started saying, what's the next country from where the brands will come? And the answer is very clear and obvious, it's China. But there's one advantage China has, which South Korea didn't have, and Japan didn't have. And Germany didn't have when they started 100 years ago. That is, when these countries started on building global brands and selling them to the Western developed world, their products were really crap. I mean, the great joke about the Japanese brands comes from the Jerry Lewis movie, where the guy takes out a gun and shoots the other guy, and instead of being shot, the words "made in Japan" come out of the cylinder. You know, That was the quality of Japanese products. They were really the worst products, right? So, but China is different. China is the only emerging market in the history of mankind that has actually mastered making global products. They make the iPod, they make the iPhone, which many of you are carrying, they make the iPad. Okay, they make it for Western countries, but they do have the competence in the country of making global products, which makes them unique. So I ask you the question, and this is where I started my argument with JB. Is it easier to have a brand and add world-class quality products, or is it easier to have world-class quality products and add a brand? Right? That's a question, right? I mean, we can debate this, but that's where we start. So China is the only emerging market in the history of mankind that has the capability, huge capability, to make world-class products. And all they need to do is now add brands. Now let us say, as a thought experiment, maybe there are 1,000 Chinese manufacturers who have mastered making world-class products. Actually, it has to be more, but for this thought experiment, let's just take 1,000. Right? Who have mastered making products on a world-class basis. Maybe 100 of them decide, you know what? We are doing all this manufacturing. We make, Foxconn, which is the largest contract manufacturer in the world. I mean, until 2 years ago, by the way, people don't know this. Till 2 years ago, they were larger than Apple. They make all the Apple products, by the way. They were larger than Apple. They had 117 billion in sales, and Apple had about 98 billion in sales till 2 years ago. Yeah? So they were larger than. They work on a margin, gross margin of 7% and a net margin of 1.5%. And then you look at Apple's 30, 40% net margin, and you start thinking, why the hell am I producing for Apple, right? So let's say 1,000 of these world-class contract manufacturers exist in China who are manufacturing for the Western world. And at some stage, 100 of them say, let's put in our own brands and go global with our brands instead of just manufacturing for others. Maybe 10 of them succeed, which means we should have at least 10 global brands coming out of China in the next decade. And you have already started seeing the signs of this. Haier, Huawei, ZTE, Lenovo, but Lenovo is already a global brand, so I didn't mention it for that reason, because it's already global. It's the world leader in computers. They are now the world leader. They just overtook HP. So you will see media, Galans. Galans makes, I went to the Galans factory. They took me to one floor on the factory of 6 floors. They say we make 100,000 microwaves a day, 40% of the world's production. Every floor has 36 lines. There are 32 people on each line. They get 5 minutes break in every hour of production. And, 100,000 microwaves come out of the factory every day. They were making, I went to the warehouse, you could see every company from General Electric to Siemens to whatever company, Bosch, all their microwaves, branded microwaves lying there. I told the guys, what's the difference between the microwaves? They said every company, whether it's Sears or Walmart or Bosch or Siemens or, they all, General Electric, they all give us different specifications of what they want their microwave to be. Plastic top, this thing. But the machine that runs a microwave is a small metal box like this. That is the same in all microwaves. We produce that. Why? Because if we are 40% of the world's manufacture of microwaves, you might as well backward integrate into making this little box, right? It makes total sense for that. Right? So that's, Galans. And you see the Galans, in many countries, they've started selling under their own brand name because they realize that that game of manufacturing at a cheap price is going to be over soon. Now, of course, in our book, we have some Indian brands, we have some Brazilian brands, we have some Korean, some brands from Mexico and Guatemala and Colombia, all these other emerging markets, because it's a book about how emerging market brands will go global. But really, we can talk about all these other emerging markets, but it's China that's the 1,000-pound gorilla in the room. China is bigger in GDP than India, Russia, South Africa, Brazil combined. That's how big they are, in terms. And so I like to leave you with one other thought, and that is that for the last 40 years, China has been manufacturing for the world. My big learning, the biggest learning I had being in China, I spent 2 months visiting, I don't know how many factories and companies all over the country. The biggest learning I had was that the world has been, China has been manufacturing for the world for the last 40 years. In the next 40 years, the world will manufacture for China. Already today, you see, their growth rate goes down. Australia is having a boom. Why? China, mining. Canada is having a boom. Why? China, and the natural resources they consume. Brazil is having a boom. Why? China. The French wine industry is having highest prices ever. Why? China. Africa, as my friend Mo Ibrahim, who's one of the richest Africans, tells me always, he says, Nirmalaya, for 40 years, 50 years, our natural resources and land was lying there. Nobody cared about us in Africa. Today, because of China, everybody wants to be in Africa. And Africa is booming because of China. Because that's where the consumption is going to play. And so it's a very interesting phase that we are living in, where the production is moving from being produced in China to being produced for China. If made in China was the word for the last 40 years in the West, owned by China is going to be the word for the next 40 years. Because they're generating so much cash, they have to buy assets, because you can't put them all in treasury bills. So you have to buy companies, you have to buy natural resources, you have to buy land, you have to buy mining, you have to buy everything. So as I always say, the joke in America is China is using their money to buy their assets. Thank you very much.